Welcome to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. To be austere or not to be, that is the question. Whether 'tis nobler in the mind to suffer the austerity sandwich of outrageous stolen fortune, or to take arms against the city of banksters. Well, since moving to London, I have, of course, been enjoying the austerity sandwich. Let me demonstrate here. This is a slice of bread. And of course, this is a slice of bread. Now, the austerity sandwich is when you fill this with a slice of bread. You see, this would be then the austerity sandwich. Yeah, that's really, really good. Now, scientists in the UK say that this is by far the cheapest sandwich available. They did a study here, a Quango. They did a study, and they found that this was the cheapest sandwich. Now, speaking of doing his part for austerity, George Osborne, the Chancellor of the frickin' Exchequer, is giving up his monthly welfare check. Yes, it seems the Chancellor of the frickin' Exchequer has been collecting child benefit for years. He makes over £134,000 per year, and some hard-working, tax-paying Joe Pint of Lager has been paying for George's children's upkeep. Stacey Herbert.
Max, this reminds me of World War II when so many Brits sacrificed for the good of the nation. I'm giving up my child benefit from today so that my children and yours aren't saddled with our debts forever. By Chancellor George Osborne. This week, my family will not receive the child benefit we've been getting every week since our children were born. Any household where at least one member is earning more than £60,000 will be in a similar position.
Right, so Osborne is a welfare bum, a parasite on the state, and his job is to help other parasites like HSBC, Barclays, Royal Bank of Scotland, and Lloyd's similarly collect corporate and bankster welfare from the state. The UK economy is shrinking. Why? Because of scroungers like Osborne, Cameron, and the banks.
Now, I might add, he's been pretty much alone on the world stage of leaders as introducing austerity. And so he's doubled down, even cutting his own child benefit, despite the fact that this week, IMF economists apologize for austerity forecasts. So the International Monetary Fund's chief economist today acknowledged that the fund blew its forecast for Greece and other European economies because it did not fully understand how government austerity efforts would undermine economic growth. The new and highly technical paper looks again at the issue of fiscal multipliers, the impact that a rise or fall in government spending or tax collection has on a country's economic output. So, Max, they've been looking at the Eurozone and making projections based on a 0.5 multiplier, which is a very low multiplier effect of any fiscal policy. But what they've discovered is actually this is only appropriate for a nation with low debt, low fraud, low amounts of fraud, and a stable banking system. It turns out that for Greece, for example, it's 1.5. So for every dollar in cuts to government spending, it actually takes $1.50 out of the economy.
Well, the IMF knows this to be true. The fact that they say this is a surprise is a lie. The austerity measures, and by the way, since imposing austerity in the UK, the debts have gone up. So there has really been no austerity. When the IMF talks about austerity in countries like Greece, or when they talk about it here in the UK, it's justification to bypass civil liberties to commit massive injustices against the local population that's having their wealth stolen. So when the cops in Greece would use tear gas and other forms of punishment, collective punishment on the Greek people, they say it's part of an austerity package, even though we know, and the IMF knows, that that's false. It's just justification for trampling on civil liberties.
And so they talk about the fiscal multiplier, but of course in the City of London you have to mention the fraud multiplier as well. How does that factor into these models of, for every dollar of real collateral in the economy. Remember, there's at least $100 in fraud backing that.
The multipliers of fraud, as you point out, are not calculated by the IMF. They're not calculated by the government of the UK. It's a real problem. There are trillions of dollars and trillions of pounds of fraud money that they put off the balance sheet. The population is not even left with the bread of an austerity sandwich. They're left with the crumbs. You know, we have crumbs here on the table, and this is what the people in the UK, the people of Greece, the people of Europe, the people of the United States are suffering through now. They're being forced to live on the crumbs. It's all about corralling the population into zones where all civil liberties are deprived, and the consequences of austerity, which is to say extinction and genocide, are written into law.
So the chief economist here is Olivier Blanchard, and he says forecasters significantly underestimated the increase in unemployment and the decline in domestic demand associated with fiscal consolidation. So again, here we look as a population, and all the markets, all the mainstream financial press, what they do is they look for every single word the chief economists of these banks and these central banks and the people advising George Osborne, what they have to say about what we should do with the economy. And yet they totally, obviously don't know what they're doing. They're just pulling it out of a magic bag of tricks. They don't know.
It's a huge wealth transfer, and they use the language of economics and finance to bamboozle mainstream media into mouthing their propaganda while they victimize a whole segment of the population that's being financially exterminated. Or by using interest rates, we see the imposition of what I would call interest rate related apartheid, where if you're in the top 1%, your cost of borrowing money is 0%. If you're going to Wonga for a payday loan, you basically have the same rights as a black under apartheid. It's financial apartheid in this country. It's sickening.
Well, talk about this wealth consolidation and this wealth transfer. High-stakes gambling machines suck money from poorest communities. MPs express alarm about £5 billion spent on fixed odds betting terminals in northern cities and London boroughs. So it seems these betting shops with these little slot machines have been consolidating, basically clustering in the poorest areas, i.e. mostly Labour constituencies, very few in Tory constituencies, but they're sucking billions of pounds out of the economy from the very poorest. Now, the Labour MPs are blaming the casino companies, but Tories blamed the culture of poor people rather than betting companies for exploiting them. John Redwood, the Conservative MP for Wokingham in Berkshire, which has 3 betting shops, said he had been surprised by the spread of bookmakers in poorer areas. So he says, Max, that I put it down to the fact that poor people believe there's one shot to get rich. They put getting rich down to luck, and they think they can take a gamble.
Right. The Tories are scapegoating the poor as part of a program of genocide. And furthermore, the same people who run these gambling outlets in these neighborhoods are owned or affiliated with the same banks that are being bailed out by the state, and are the same banks that are availing themselves to near 0% interest rates. But to the extent that interest rates are not at absolute zero, they might be 2 or 3 basis points for a loan, that incremental piece of interest has to be paid for, and it's calculated to go into these neighborhoods. So when you go in and you buy a lottery ticket or one of these one-armed bandits in a poor neighborhood, you put that pound in the machine, it goes directly into paying off BAE's debt, Tesco's debt, David Cameron's debt, George Osborne's debt. They take the money directly out of the pockets through the banking system, which is totally consolidated. There's no competition. It's the dead hand of banksters. You take that money from the hardworking British person, and it goes directly into Osborne's pocket to pay off his ill-gotten, illegally accrued debt. As a matter of fact, if I look at this austerity sandwich, I can see George Osborne's face. Not since Jesus was seen on a toasted grilled cheese sandwich has there been such a miraculous sighting of a portraiture of the exchequer in this slice of bread. That felt good.
I think it's the Chancellor of the frickin' Exchequer. But, you know, here, John Redwood, the Conservative MP for Woking, which is one of these commuter belts from the City of London, so there are a lot of bankers working there. he is wrong to mock the poor for thinking that, first of all, there's one shot to get rich. There is. And that you can gamble. That's the only way to make it rich. Well, look at what is happening in the City of London. HSBC gambled that, laundering money for drug cartels would pay off. It did. They got one shot and they won. RBS, Lloyd's, every single bank here in London gambled that George Osborne would come to their rescue once they were selling all these fraudulent loans, fraudulent interest rate swaps, and every other derivative product, that the Chancellor would come to the rescue. And he himself would sacrifice his child benefit to make the bankers whole.
And the next step for Osborne is to sacrifice his child. And he would throw the child into the volcano if it meant getting a good deal on a derivative, number one. And number two, J.P. Morgan. They were gambling in derivatives, the so-called London whale scandal. They got caught breaking the law. They got caught breaking the proprietary desk law, and they gave them $9 billion to cover the loss. And the Chancellor said, oh, here's $9 billion, and they covered the bet for them.
And so all of these betting shops are clustering in high street areas of the very poorest regions and constituencies. And what they found is that betting shops are cluttering up Britain because they were listed as financial services in planning guidelines. This meant empty shop fronts that once contained banks and building societies could be converted into betting shops without any planning permission. So the government here includes them as financial services. It considers them financial services. And the UK has turned over to a gambling casino economy, part of the casino gulag economy, because if you roll back to 2006, the headline reads, "Take from the poor to give to the rich." That's New Labour's super casino plan. So here John Redwood said he blames the poor. He says it's not the casino companies, and yet documents from 2006, they clearly stated that they will not bother with areas that are not poor because they need the poorest of the poor in order to make any money in these casinos.
That's what I'm saying. Yes, it is financial services. When you put the pound into the slot machine in the ghetto, it goes into Osborne's pocket to pay his debt. It's a financial, they're all consolidated. It's all owned by the same conglomeration. It's a genocide of the poor. That's their policy. It's the final solution. Thank George Osborne. Where'd you get that idea? All right, Stacey Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Stay tuned for the second half. I'll be talking to Das.
You know how sometimes you see a story and it seems so whole and complete, you think you understand it, and then you glimpse something else. You hear or see some other part of it and realize everything you thought you knew, you don't know? I'm Tom Hartman. Welcome to The Big Picture.
Government no longer represents the people, and the people are going to take this country back.
In the traditional sense, but this is a revolution of the mind.
The way our economic system currently runs is not democratic.
How long did they think we would be quiet? We're not gonna take it. No, we ain't gonna take it. We're not gonna take it anymore. We're not gonna take it. No, we ain't gonna take it. We're not gonna take it anymore.
как приказ принято. Сразу уезжать, готов.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. I'm Max Keiser. Time now to go down under to Australia and speak with Satyajit Das, author of Extreme Money. Das, welcome back to the Keiser Report.
Nice to be with you, Max.
All right, Das, let's talk 2013. What do you see as the key economic themes for the new year?
Well, the first theme, I think, is this is the year in which people are going to realize that economic growth ain't coming back. Because I think for the last few years, everybody said, well, we tried this, it didn't work. Oh, no, we've got a new thing, it'll work. And I think people will suddenly realize that growth is not coming back at the levels we saw, say, pre-2007. The second thing which will flow from that, I think, is that people will focus more intensely on the policy tools, which is fiscal policy, the monetary policy, which is zero interest rates. As you know, we might have negative interest rates, and also all the money printing, the quantitative easing. People will start to ask questions like, does this stuff actually work? And if so, when will it work?
All right, so Das, let me cut in for a second, because you said the
Sure.
key theme here in 2013 will be lack of growth. Now, what we've seen in the past is that policymakers, when faced with lack of growth, they change the definition of growth. For example, they'll change how to calculate GDP. They'll change how to calculate CPI. Now we have a new central banker coming in to England. His name is Mark Carney. They're bringing him over from Canada. He's talking about nominal GDP growth. Isn't that just basically more of this shuffling around definitions to hide the fact that the economies are in free fall? Your thoughts?
Absolutely. I think we're going to change that. I mean, the French are experimenting with gross national happiness. So if you live in France and, you know, if you could include things like the amount of garlic in your food and the beauty of women and the sort of length of skirts, their GDP would be just monstrous. So people will change all the definitions around. You're absolutely correct. The most funny one of that was Argentina. In Argentina, when inflation went through the roof, they decided basically to exclude anything which was going up too fast on the basis that nobody could afford it anyway. So I think we'll see a lot of that. You're absolutely correct. And I think that's going to be a theme of more lies, more hypocrisy, more manipulation on the part of politicians, because we all know without delivering prosperity, they'll have trouble getting re-elected. It's just simple as that.
All right, Das, you're a smart fella. I've got my own theory that I would like to present to you to get your thoughts on it. I call it the zombie economics, and it works like this. There are those in the economy who have access to money at 0%. So every time prices go up, they simply dig deeper into their 0% infinite credit line, so they never feel it. Those who have to pay 3% or 6% or 16% or 30% or a payday loan at 400%, they actually feel it when prices go up. Therefore, the central banks are talking about deflation, but they're talking to people whose cost of money is zero and who have an infinite credit line. They live in a parallel world, correct?
Absolutely. I mean, the classic one is in Japan. If you actually look at Japan, that the phrase zombie economics actually comes from Japan, because after the Bank of Japan started to flood the system with money, print money, had zero interest rates, what we saw was exactly what you're describing, except that the fact financial assets didn't go up in price in Japan. But in terms of the real economy, what we saw was that businesses, because they could keep their loans in place, didn't sell, you know, damnly bad assets. They didn't do anything. They didn't do any of the steps necessary. And effectively what the zero interest rates do is it's a massive transfer of wealth. So if you've saved money, if you've been a good boy or a good girl and done all the things that you were taught to do, thrift and all of that sort of stuff, you basically now pay the costs of all the people who've borrowed, who more importantly, as you correctly say, will keep borrowing. I mean, Bernanke last year, people missed this at just one of his press conferences, admitted that quantitative easing has very little impact on the real economy. What he's trying to do is boost financial asset prices, and read from that, he's trying to help out the financial sector. I mean, basically, the world is one gigantic carry trade with zero interest costs. And that's what we're seeing. And the poor guys, if saved, are going to get killed. But, you know, at the end of it, we have to remember a simple truth. People have made bad loans, and the bad loans are resolved in one of two ways. You either write them down, or you pretend not to write them down and stretch them out. We're just stretching it out, and the people paying it are the savers. And that's the tragedy. And I wonder how long the rentier, the middle class, whose savings are being wiped out, will start to protest. Not to mention the other group, which are the people who don't have jobs, the 25% or 27% in Spain, the 20% in Greece, the 15% in places like Portugal and Ireland. When are they going to take to the streets and basically tear some buildings down? I think that's the key issues going forward.
Right, so the central banks are stoking social unrest because their definition of their mandate as central bankers is to act like a hedge fund and to stoke asset prices, even though it's destroying the real economy. So they are creating the social unrest that you are suggesting is only going to get worse. Now, one place in the economy where we see a massive distortion is in the sovereign bond prices. The UK gilt, or the sovereign bond market in the UK, is trading at a 300-year high. Treasury bonds in America are trading at a 240-year high. When is the bond bubble going to burst? You've got Bill Gross over at PIMCO suggesting it's going to burst soon. That's why he's moving into some other assets. What do you think about this bond bubble bursting? Is it going to burst in the near term, or can they keep the Ponzi scheme going much longer, Das?
Well, I think they hope they can keep the Ponzi scheme going, and I think it has a bit more to go. But you're absolutely correct. To my mind, sovereign debt and money are synonymous. And I think James Grant caught the moment really well when he said that government bonds basically once gave you risk-free return. Now they give you return-free risk. And they're just debasing that. But the most important thing to understand is why those yields are where they are. People seem to have missed the fundamental fact, which is the Fed was buying 60 to 70%, and at times as high as 90% of all new U.S. Treasury bond issuance. So basically it was like financial masturbation between the U.S. Treasury on the one side and the Fed, who were basically circling the money around from each other. But I'll give you some idea of how absurd the game has got. You were talking about the Bank of England and Mark Carney. But the Bank of England has now made, quote unquote, a profit on its quantitative easing, simply because it's creating reserves, which doesn't cost it anything, and it's buying gilts on the other side, and the positive carry gave them income. They're going to distribute that up to the government as a dividend, and basically the government is going to finance a corporate tax cut from this. I had to read the actual announcement about 6 or 7 times trying to work out how do I get in on this. But to give you some idea of that this is not uniquely an English experiment in the States, what they're talking about is the fact that the Fed issues the bonds, the Treasury buys, I beg your pardon, the Treasury issues them, the Fed buys them. And they're both arms of the same government. So basically what they're talking about is why don't we just forgive the debt? And I said, well, what happens to the balance sheet of the central bank, which holds all this stuff? They said that's just an accounting technicality. This is just debasement of fundamental principles of sound money on a level that we haven't seen. But I think the game has got a little bit to go, simply because everybody wants to believe. Nobody wants to look at the other conclusion, which would be devastating and damaging to everybody. And nobody wants to go down that path. And certainly the politicians aren't going to lead us into that particular decision-making point.
All right, Das, you talk about financial masturbation, and following up on what's happening in the U.S., they're talking about this $1 trillion platinum coin, a magic coin, to save America from going over the debt ceiling cliff. And this is, of course, favored by the modern monetary theorists, who also would fall into the camp of the financial masturbators, I have a feeling. What are your thoughts, Das, on the magic $1 trillion platinum coin MMT fandango?
Oh, well, this is brilliant. I actually, MMT, which as you know stands for modern monetary theory, I actually call it magic money tricks. Because basically all they're saying is they can print money. We all know you can print money, but at the ultimate point, money has to represent something real, real goods and services. And what they forget is if you keep printing money, which is the Gideon Gono, which, as you remember, was the head of the central bank of Zimbabwe, effectively people just stop using the currency. They move to other things, whether it's to precious metals or to an alternative currency. And basically, this game with the platinum coin is just meaningless. At the end of the day, you've got to admit that money is just a means to an end. It's a claim on real goods and services. You've got to be able to eat. You've got to be able to buy things. And debasing currency, debasing trust, does not in any shape or form get you further down the path to financial soundness. But human beings are capable of infinite delusion. You and I both know that. And we'll delude ourselves for just a little bit longer.
Right. It's also schizophrenic because the same people who are talking about platinum-based monetary theory hate gold. So, of course, how do they square that circle? Now, let's move on. It's almost been 6 years since the global financial crisis began. There's a new swaps clearinghouse and new Tier 1 capital ratios. Will any of this help? And what has yet to be addressed before the system can ever hope to cover using these again, accounting tricks, changing the Tier 1 ratio? Of course, they're now including gold as 100% margin collateral value in their Tier 1 capital. So that seems to be recognition anyway that we will end up back on a gold standard. But what about this type of trickery by the Bank of International Settlements and others, Das?
You'll be amused to know that I was asked my opinion on the Central Clearinghouse about 4 years ago. And I basically said at that point in time, look, the fundamental problem of the derivatives market is that there are